Actually, I prefer to have the data streaming in from their data portal. Yes, Professor Howard.
I wasn't trying to signal anything. It really was rubbing my eyes. I wasn't signaling any time.
Ah, okay, no worries. Yes, I'm being conscious of the time as well. But you can download this, but recognizing that once you do, it's going to be static. So that's something to be aware of. So I'm going to go back to the floodplain. In this particular case, feel free to explore another layer. But inside here, I can say, oh, I've got some choices there. That's a good thing. Okay. And I can also explore the data as well. Very good. So,
which file would you use to have
in this
stuff updated?
If you would go to this particular data portal or any other hub site and see if there is a feature layer that is actually from the web. The challenge though, and I know that we're sort of living in rarefied air in some ways in academia and maybe a lot of federal agencies and other organizations. Remember that, we talked about this a little bit upstairs, that whole broadband equity thing that we talked about. So sometimes I actually download the data so that I can take it to, when we taught in Costa Rica, you could basically scan your email headers. There's no online mapping happening in the middle of the rainforest, right? There's just no bandwidth to support it. So in that case, you know, again, depending on where you're teaching or working and so on, sometimes it's good to have the actual file at your fingertips. Sometimes, and I wrote about it not too long ago here, we're still not completely away from the following issue happening, and that is what to do when your data service goes missing. So I was working on a project, as Professor Howard was indicating, when Gordon Lightfoot passed away. I thought a great opportunity for me to expand my Great Lakes bathymetry lesson, talk about shipwrecks and so on. When it came time for me to update that, the mosaic data set for all 5 Great Lakes was gone. And the pieces were still there. Noah had a piece, you know, but I would have had to spend about 2 days reconfiguring them all to be in the same format, projection, attributes. Some were in meters, some were in feet on the depth. It was just, I didn't have 2 days to just mess around with the data. So what happens when your data service goes missing? This is just a couple of lessons learned there. So all that is to say in terms of our discussion right now is that I don't want to be old school on this all. Obviously, you're not going to download the ESRI elevation service for the globe. No. You're not going to download the 10-meter DEMs for the whole planet, the way-back imagery, et cetera. No, there's some things that you don't want to have a backup copy. There might be a certain number of things, though, depending on where you're teaching. In this case, if I had downloaded it before it went missing, I would have saved myself a lot of work. So it just depends on the size and your venue and your purpose for what you're doing. Sometimes it's good to have a backup, is all I'm saying, because we're still living in this sort of transitional zone between the ways that we would get data that was always a static, whether it was on disk or as a web service, but it was relatively locked. Now we want to be able to have these data services that are updating continually. So I'm not saying download every single thing to your own local device, but if it's really important to you and or you're teaching in a place where there's limited bandwidth, or you're a little bit nervous about the source because you don't know if that person will maintain it in the future, like if it's jsmith at wonderfulcommunitycollege.org or .edu, and what if they're a grad student and their username, right, sometime you'll graduate. What do you do at the college here when your students graduate? What do you do with their data? Okay, these are things to think about, right? So if you've got a person at in an ArcGIS Online organization, they've served up some data, and you're depending on that data set. Have they copied it to another organization? You know, I love the tools that we have at our fingertips, but kind of be aware of the organization, okay? I advocate, just on a note on that regard, that if you've got some good data here that your students have generated, the ArcGIS Online administrator does something with it with the student's permission, to make sure that all the trees or the ecoregion that they studied or some other worthy project that I've seen displayed on the wall upstairs somehow gets put into another part of their organization, where if the student graduates and their account is eventually deleted, that data will live on. I'm a little nervous about, and just fully conscious of, we want to be able to have this data in the future. And now that it's not on any sort of physical device, just something to be aware of. There is one notorious example that I won't name the university name, but the ArcGIS Online administrator was a bit overzealous and got rid of certain usernames because the students had graduated and their faculty had moved on or something like that, and that data was no longer available, and some people depended on it for a publication that was pointing to those data services. There was an ebook that was pointing to these data services, so that was not good. That was not a good situation because there was eventually no way to recover it. Right, so backups are still in 2023. I know that sounds kind of old school, but having multiple backups is still a good thing to think about. Okay, so all that being said, we've got these ArcGIS Online hub sites. Another thing to think about, and I'm going to go back to my data strategies page, and that is I've got a couple of best of, okay? Top 10s. This is number 5 here. Satellite imagery. Open a few of those. Landsat, vector data. I'm going to just explore these ever so briefly with you folks. This is kind of like the top 10 coolest bands of all time, right? That you had discussions with your high school friends maybe about. And you would never agree, right? You'd all have your own favorite bands. And so this is a little bit subjective. All these lists, they're sort of Joseph's favorite portals based on, working in geospatial data for most of my career. So admittedly, it's a little bit my own favorites, but ones I've found most useful. The top 10 most useful geodata portals. Open data portal based on ArcGIS Hub. We just talked about that, Living Atlas of the World. So we've actually covered 2 of these already. Season at Columbia University right here in New York. Yes, I love Season. What's not to love? The Atlas of the Biosphere, Natural Earth, FAO Geo Network, and a couple of others. Those are go-to global wonderful sites, really. Because they're not, most of them except for these 2, are not ArcGIS hub sites or Living Atlas of the World, you will have to do a little bit more data manipulation than in the sort of the low-hanging fruits that we just talked about. You might have to change the projection. You might have to go from a CSV to a shapefile or a geodatabase or something like that. You might have to go through a few other additional steps. But these are the top 10. It's kind of like, again, the favorite bands or the top 10 places to visit in New York before you depart the planet, right? It's a little bit subjective. But another one that I love is this top 12 most useful lands. I couldn't limit it to 10, sorry. The top 10 or the top 12 Landsat image sites. Earth Explorer from USGS, the Globus Viewer, etc. So those are good for Landsat imagery. And then finally, the top 7 satellite imagery sources outside of Landsat, other satellite imagery as well. Useful. Free. I'm all about the free and least painful steps to get it into a workable data layer for your project. That's what I'm really focused on. So those top those top 10, top 12, top 6, etc. lists, there's also organizations. One of the things that we chatted about, a couple of us were chatting about this morning, is the GIS state-based organizations. The New York one is very robust. The Pennsylvania one, you've got Scotty Wall down there. She's a wonderful GIO, the Geospatial Information Officer for the state. The PASDA, Pennsylvania State Data Access, they've had this goes back to the clunky 20th century days of GIS, but they've had a rich data portal there. So the GIS state portals are really quite good as well. And the organizations too, just again for you students especially, are great sources to connect with the community, like the New York one, and find a job and find people that you respect, want to talk to, want to chat with. So it's beyond data. They're good communities to be with. I've been to 6 of those state GIS meetings, so they also have face-to-face meetings. And one of the best ones this year was in February at Wisconsin's WLIA, the Wisconsin Land Inventory. We were holed up there for 3 days in a blizzard in February in Wisconsin. Well, what better people to be holed up with, stuck in the convention center with than GIS people? It was so great. And plus there was a Quick Trip nearby, which is a Wisconsin-based geospatial-enabled organization where they figure out where all their stores are going to be, these convenience stores based on proximity to La Crosse, and their dairy there. So, they're cows that are there they get the yogurt from, and so on. Anyway, the cheese. What's not to love? So those organizations are good as well. Also, I want to be respectful of your time. Just as like there's no single best data source for one specific topic, there's no single geospatial gold mine. However, we are in a much better position than we were just a few years ago with Hub, and I also have a list on here of the best Hub sites to go to. But the good thing, the choice is a good thing. It forces you and me as data users to think critically about the data sets that we may or may not choose. As is clear on another post of mine, choices abound, but these choices require the user to investigate and evaluate each of them. Do you need to spend days, weeks, months evaluating each source? No. I mean, there's something of value in saying, hey, I just want to explore this. I'm not necessarily going to use it, but I want to investigate it. I think the main value is, the main thing to keep in mind is understand your data, right? Know where it came from, how often it's updated, who created it, etc. So inside ArcGIS Online Living Atlas of the World, you will see posts from Lisa Berry, Bern Sokolsky, Jim Harries, and other data compilers, I guess for lack of a better term. And some of them are Esri people, some of them are outside, like your wonderful state GIO here in New York, and academics, people in private industry, people in nonprofits. So I think that the bottom line is we have some guidelines here, but this is a modifiable document, right? Just like data itself. I'm going to be updating this as time goes on, and actually I've updated it since 2020. Yes, but I don't have the new. For some reason, WordPress doesn't put the new date on it. So if I modify this, it keeps the original date. Maybe some of you know how to tweak the WordPress published date. But anyway, I hope that was helpful at least to get you thinking about, okay, I would start with, again, the Living Atlas of the World, the State Data Portal, the ArcGIS Online Hub sites, the ArcGIS Hub sites, these top 7, top 10 lists, and other organizations that I have listed there. I know that was just sort of, again, a bite-sized little gluten-free chunk-o geospatial, but I hope that was useful, what you were seeking, Professor Howard and Professor Little and others.
Well, we have a whole course devoted to geospatial data acquisition, processing, and management that several of my students here are gathering right now. We talk about data issues for an entire semester. We're only scratching the
Indeed.
surface.
Yeah, no matter how much time
really
you have.
Major topic. So thank you.
Well, and here's to me an example of the sort of the paradigm shift. In the past, you would have to go to usgs.gov and get all of the DEMs for Rochester, right? You'd have to get all those individual little cells, and then you'd have to stitch them together, mosaic them together, get them in the right map projection, etc. Now we have a data service, right? It's sitting in ArcGIS Online of elevation. There's another one for slope. There's another one for aspect. There's another one that's actually hillshade. So you don't actually have to get all those little tiles anymore. However, just another indication for we're sort of in this world where we're still in transition. In ArcGIS Online anyway, you cannot do analysis with those streaming elevation data services. You actually have to get that into, you have to mask out a piece and then save that in your own ArcGIS Online org for you to do analysis on. So the data services are there for raster only. You can do an analysis on the vector data, but for the raster data, you actually have to say, ban this and save that in my own org and then do analysis on it. So just, again, sort of when I was, way back in the 20th century, I grew up in Grand Junction, Colorado, Western Slope, Mesa County, FIPS code 08077. Oh, that's so geeky. FIPS code, 08 is Colorado. Where's our database people? 077 is Mesa County. And so when I was in middle school, they said, hey, we're going to have, you can go up to Powderhorn ski area. And the advice was, keep your knees bent and you'll be, just keep your knees bent and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. That was basically the ski instruction. Oh, okay. I've never been on a downhill ski slope, but that's kind of the mantra here. Keep your knees bent because GIS is changing, right? Data services are changing, but you folks are lifelong learners, and I salute you all. It is a wonderful world to be in because we need good people like you making smart decisions on our planet. So all best wishes going forward. Map on. Be the change agents in the world. Oh no, you folks are the best. We can hang out here and chat more about data, but again, I wanted to be sensitive to your time, so much appreciate you being here.